Welcome to a paradigm shift to extended HPV genotyping, getting to the core of the matter, hosted by BD. I'm Krista Mitch, nurse practitioner and women's health clinical manager at BD. It's my privilege today to introduce our speaker, Melissa Randolph, who's been serving in the field of cytopathology since her graduation from Indiana University in 1999. She returned as a member of the Department of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine at Indiana University in 2001. Since then, her path has been steady and climbing an experience that spans the technical mastery of laboratory processing, serving as a cytotechnologist, then supervisor, then manager of operations of an 18-hospital system that comprises IU Health. During that time, Melissa has produced 13 peer-reviewed publications to include the reprocessing of unsatisfactory Pap tests, the introduction of cell gel technique, and innovation for cytology for mutational assays and IHC to complete quality patient testing. Melissa is an invited speaker for various societies, providing webinars and workshops for CAP, ASC, ASCT, and NPR. During this time, she has given talks on topics ranging from lean Pap testing methodology with BD Totalis, women's health standard of care testing for cervical cancer screening, and change management. As her exposure to other pathology disciplines increases in her laboratory management journey, her primary focus is to embrace lean automation while continuing to support the development of evolving laboratory professionals. And with that, I'll hand it off to Melissa.
Hello and good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. I just need a couple minutes here to get set up and we will roll. So I just would like to say that in preparation for my presentation, I do have an honoraria to disclose. I have been compensated by BD to give this presentation. Okay, starting out, we would like to talk about our objectives for today's talk. So we have three that we would like to cover today. Our learning objective number one is to understand the impact of integrated molecular automation on laboratory efficiency in cervical cancer screening. Our second objective is to explore the advantages of innovative HPV assay designs, including what extended genotyping capabilities mean for a lab, for the patients and for their physicians, for more accurate risk assessment and patient management. And our third objective is to just delve a little bit into what future directions look like, both in our laboratory as well as the United States, as we start having these conversations about self-collection for HPV and cervical cancer screening. So those are the things I'd like to cover today. Just to tell you a little bit about the entity that I represent, it is called Indiana University Health. We are an 18-hospital system that is spread throughout Indiana. Our women's health testing provides laboratory testing for over 100,000 tests per year. So we have a pretty good volume between our Pap test and our HPV testing. We also function as a referral network for the state of Indiana for several of our outreach entities and as well as community services. And we have a really nice focus on both the Pap test screening as well as a newer horizon of anal Pap test screening, HPV testing for a very large cohort of underserved patients with HIV and infectious disease. So these are the three things that kind of make up our makeup. So when we started thinking about what is the future of cervical cancer screening and HPV testing, we really wanted to take a step back and think about the bare bones of what is happening both in the world and what is happening in our laboratory, definitely as healthcare is changing rapidly. So just thinking of a SWOT analysis, and SWOT, for anyone who isn't familiar with this business term, is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And when we think about these things, we're trying to ask ourselves, what are our questions that we're trying to answer? So how do our physicians want the world to work tomorrow? And in that, how do we support them and how we support their patients? Where do we fit into this world? We obviously know that we have a lot of change ahead of us. we've had these things previewed for us for several years, and now I think we're finally getting to that culmination of what it's going to mean for laboratories. And finally, how are clinical guidelines changing the need to accommodate new technologies? But if you will, maybe it should say, how are new technologies accommodating our changing clinical guidelines? So these are the types of things that we wanted to take into consideration as we thought about our next level of cervical cancer screening in our lab. We also wanted to kind of examine what our working tenets were as far as, is the world still the way that I thought it was 5 years ago, and what will it be 5 years from now? So our working tenets at this time is the pap smear test volume will continue to decrease while HPV test volume will increase. We also know that as laboratory medicine advances, more improved technology will lead to more automation and more convergence with molecular testing, both in women's platforms and elsewhere. We know that cytotechnologists, who have been primarily the role players in what cervical cancer screening looks like, their roles and responsibilities are rapidly changing, not only as the schools are kind of closing and disappearing, but we finally have hit that period of baby boomer retirements where we're really, really losing these professionals at an alarming rate. So we know their roles and responsibilities are changing. We also know that anytime we put anything into a laboratory, we want to really examine what is the capacity for less personnel touch points, and really kind of push ourselves a little bit in that regard, because our healthcare workers are such highly valued capital. And we know that the EHR and EMR delivery will change. We know that right now there's several different types of cloud-based applications that are infiltrating our EHRs, as well as like our traditional interfaces. And we know that our physicians are going to continue to demand us to change with those changing times. So those are our working tenets. We also wanted to kind of ask ourselves, before we committed to anything, we wanted to ask ourselves, is our system ready to accommodate this? Are our OBGYN stakeholders ready for primary HPV testing? Are they still kind of on the bandwagon of co-testing? We needed to see what that dialogue was like internally. We did business applications, like conducted a cost per test analysis. We reviewed some next generation instrumentation from Roche as well as BD. But just a caveat, no other really kind of came into our purview, just Roche and BD. We thought about our space planning and what will our lab be able to accommodate. We really, really wanted to think about our hands-on, hands-off analysis. In my particular laboratory, we had cytotechs playing a big role in our HPV testing in the past. And if we were going to apply that level of personnel to our future test, we wanted to make sure that we were going to be able to minimize that labor effort so that they can concentrate on what they do best, which is looking at the slides. We also wanted to know what the LIS lift and support was going to look like. As you can imagine, depending on the level of your organization, sometimes that lift falls squarely on the shoulders of the manager, and sometimes it's able to be kind of supported by really robust LIS programs. And we really had to ask ourselves, what are we able to do? We also wanted to think about what our future on-site support looks like if we are going to have instrument downtimes, and then what is the critical timing of the response for those downtimes. So that was very important to us. And then finally, wanted to review all the endorsements that are outlining the future of cervical cancer screening. So looking over the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force, the American Cancer Society, ACOG, and ASCCP, and really look for that alignment, because we were going to use all of this to sell our story as to what we wanted to do as an organization. So let's talk for a minute about the value of extended genotyping and why we possibly want to go this way as we explore cervical cancer screening. So when we think about extended versus partial genotyping, we have what are known as pooled results. So we know that HPV 16 and 18 for the longest time have been sinister players in the development of cervical cancer. But for equally as long, we don't know kind of what is in this makeup of pooled results that may actually be driving some of our CIN lesions, and what is actually going to emerge as the player as we have more and more patients undergoing maturity of vaccination. So when we think about extended genotyping, some of the offerings that we're looking at now will help us call out individually these genotypes that we've never been able to see before. So in this particular case, the BD assay that we reviewed would allow you to see not only your 16 and 18, but some of these other types that are emerging as players into cervical cancer carcinogenesis. So we wanted to have an assay that was going to be highly sensitive for precancer detection. And our values have shifted a little bit in terms of what cervical cancer screening looks like. It used to be that we focused on catching the cervical cancer, but now we're really focused on what is that level of catching it in the pre-cancer detection era. We wanted to be able to look at something that was going to provide additional assessment for CIN3 risk, because we know that there are also emerging players in the IHC realm with this way. So we needed to decide what was our answer to that going to be. We wanted to make sure that we were supporting personalized medicine for our patients, because if you've paid any attention to the ASCCP algorithms over the last few years, you understand that now it is not a one-size-fits-all approach. We have individual management for individual patient risk, and that includes how is the history of the patient gone? What is the patient desire as far as their treatment and things like that? What are they willing to tolerate as far as risk? So we know that that has become important for us to include as value to our clinicians. And then finally, we wanted to see what is the next generation of screening as 16 and 18 prevalence begins to decrease with our vaccine uptake and maturity. Now, you may or may not have seen this yet. This is a coming attraction in the ASCCP world, where we're starting to have guidelines formed around what do these other carcinogenic HPV types look like, what is their prevalence as far as the cervical cancer development, and what is the risk of progression to CIN3 for recurrent and persistent HPV infections, because we know that is the key as time goes on. So what I find really, really interesting about this graph is that we're starting to have these individual types called out, which is akin to what I just showed you in the capability of the BD assay. So here we have 33, 31, 52, and I'll just call out 35 as well. So we're seeing that it doesn't make up currently a large percentage of cervical cancers. However, what I think is interesting is the risk group is that these are playing, and they're starting to become as aggressive as what our 16 risk group looks like. So this is why we want to start paying attention to how these patients are progressing, what types of lesions are they going to end up with. And now we have a new cutoff line for what some of these other incidences look like, and then what the risk level is for those patients, which will allow them to extend their screening intervals. Okay, so we also wanted to examine what are our main pain points in our existing process that created the need to look for something else. And a lot of it boils down to, unfortunately, the labor that was spent on the pre-analytic processes. We took a hard look at what does it take to create the aliquot or create the type of, space in testing where we're going to be able to kind of have that walk away point or that hands off time. So we were able to look critically at our process. And again, because this is BD SurePath that we're working on, we know that it's very, very important to make sure that we do the heating step and destroy our cross-linked alcohol aldehyde bonds. So that has always been something that has limited our lab a little bit in terms of how we are able to move through this pre-analytic phase. So we thought about that. And then we also wanted to really think about what our instrument downtimes meant to us and what that recovery period means in the future and how that's going to affect our staff. And then finally, though it was no fault of the assay that we were using before, we were having a real gap with being able to interface our results from our HPV testing, partly due to kind of our gaps using COPATH. So we knew that some of the demands that our outreach clients and our clinicians were looking for were going to be severely limited by what we were doing previously. So we really wanted to look for a solution to that point and see what we could come up with. But we also really wanted to think about why would we bring automation into the lab? So again, just to speak a little bit to our lab, we're a cytology lab. We were set up with kind of the old ways and the more manual ways of doing things. So for us to jump to automation really gave us a glimpse into what clinical laboratory medicine is like. And, can we incorporate that into our processes, gain benefit from it, not only for the lab, but also for the resulting in for the clinicians and things like that. So automation was very attractive to us going forward. And the fact that we can have automation from the input of the specimen to the result was something that we would be looking for. We definitely have talked about the interaction and touch points on a high level system, and we wanted high throughput. The BD COR is capable of producing 330 sample results on the instrument, and it's also capable of hoteling those things so that if you run out of reagents or consumables somewhere else in the process, the processing does not stop. Very attractive. We like the idea of instrumentation that would have more internal monitoring, would have the ability to interact with our testing personnel and then help us maximize our uptime. And then the idea that we need to keep moving as a laboratory towards random and continuous access will help us expand our capacity and allow us to continue doing testing far into a 24-hour workday than what we were doing before. So these things were all very attractive to us. So I'm just going to take you through a little bit here on what the BD COR system looks like. And you will not have any audio, so I just like to narrate this a little bit. So the system, again, is capable of hoteling and housing up to 330 samples. It is comprised of a PX module, which is your pre-analytic processing, and a GX module that is going to do all of the PCR testing, keeping all of the specimens sealed and things like that. So these two modules work together. The GX will allow the different stages of processing to continue to occur. So even if you have a bottleneck somewhere in a process because, again, of a reagent or consumable, we still have other testing able to occur. So the second part of the system is showing that we have the ability to either use the system for straight SurePath vial testing or ThinPrep testing, as well as some labs may choose to go ahead and do aliquoting. The benefit to aliquoting is that you're going to save yourself time processing in the instrument. However, we were looking to take that aliquoting off of our personnel. So very attractive to us. So you can see here that we've got a lot of the ergonomic things built in that possibly cause pain points for personnel that are doing repetitive aliquoting and things like that. So we're seeing the samples be homogenized. There's a diluent added to the M tube, and then we're having each specimen being able to be aliquoted individually, move forward individually until all conversion is repeated on the samples. And then finally, in the last part of the instrument, after all of the DNA extraction has occurred, we're ready to load on and have all of our PCR testing done in a sealed environment, ready to be moved without any kind of person intervention. So, and then when all of our consumables are finished and we have our plate readouts, we're going to hotel all of that later on so that when the personnel are ready to come back to the instrument, they can come take these things out as the time allows for them. So the continuous throughput of both the intake of the specimen and the output of the specimen can occur with very little human interaction. So all of that in mind, we decided to pull the trigger and go ahead and go with BD COR and the BD on Clarity assay. And what we really wanted to think about is, what do these milestones look like? What does our timeline look like? And how do we work together to make this the most effective for both parties? So you can just kind of see here, we have a project phase that was developed, and you can see how much of it is customer-driven effort versus BD-driven effort. Again, there's a big lift on the customer side, so it's very important that you're partnering with someone that can help you through this and stay on track. So in our timeline, we not only had to establish security and make sure that we could get through all of our firewalls internally and things like that. We had a server to build. We had LAS development and connectivity to make sure would go through. We have different facility modifications that needed to happen. We had the installation of Synapsys, which is the middleware, and the instrument installation, as well as our training, our instrument validation, verification, and then our go live. Additionally, we really wanted to think hard about what our communication plan was going to look like to our system, because not only are we trying to kind of shake things up and we're changing our methodology and things like that, we also wanted them to understand what the benefits were to being able to make a change like this. So we had to determine what our communication plan was going to look like. So I'm a big fan of quotes and inspiration. So for this, for me, it was begin with the ending in mind. And so what did I want to achieve out of this as a laboratory manager? I wanted to make sure that we were decreasing our process steps. So we mapped that out, and in our current state, we had 11. In our future state, there was only 5. We wanted to make sure that any changes that we produced worked within our EMR and the barriers that we knew existed in our EMR to allow a divergence of test results. So we wanted to make sure that we were going to be able to enjoy this whole idea of auto verification for our negative results, and kind of enjoy being able to take some of that excess testing off of our personnel. And we wanted to work within our EMR to trigger the primary HPV screening algorithm. Now, depending on what your LIS, IS systems are, this may or may not look like much to you. For us, again, this is a cytology lab that has taken a big step into clinical lab practice, and maybe not realizing how much benefit there is into working with an algorithm that can occur that's launched by an LIS. And then finally, it was our goal as the biggest healthcare system in Indiana to lead the transition to primary HPV screening for Indiana. We wanted to make sure our key opinion leaders were available for our strategy and education and helped with the launch. We wanted to guide the education for the intended use of each offering. We really wanted to reimagine what this interaction looked like for our providers and what that test input looked like. And we wanted to deliver on our promise. So I'm sure some in the audience have seen this model before. It is called the change model. And what it is basically a schematic to represent the work effort that it takes to do change management. Now, what we have here in the middle, where the blue curve is what we refer to as the zone of disruption. And when you are doing and implementing a change that is this large, the time and effort that you put into that zone of disruption is going to make or break you. So we really put a lot of effort into making sure that the entire system was ready for a change like this. And I will be going through that in just a minute. But we also understand that with any change, there's going to be some grieving of a process that used to be. And so we really wanted to be able to speak to that and minimize that as much as possible without upsetting the masses. So in the zone of disruption, I kind of want to just bring levity to what all we actually changed. We changed our assay. We changed our test offerings so that we are more aligned with all of our different ACOG, ASCCP guidelines. We changed our report delivery to our clinicians. We changed our methodology. Our orderable names changed. The instrumentation was completely different. Our billing structure changed behind the scenes. Our supplier changed. The level of personnel required changed. We went from a high complexity test to a moderate complexity test. Our reporting structure was different, and our interaction of our department within the EMR was a big change, but we weathered it pretty well. And as a result of this, anytime you do a project like this, everybody gets a little bit smarter, everybody gets a little bit tighter, and everybody starts to dream a little bit more. So our innovation was really on fire. This is just a quick schematic of what the teams look like that help support a big implementation like this. So we not only had individuals from BD that were invested in our customer success, but we also had a very large project team that was invested in making sure that our deadlines were hit when we said they were going to be hit, that the access to speaking to other labs was available, or other national specialists or international specialists. So that was quite a group effort, and there was quite a bit of support here. Now, one thing that we knew that we had to pay a lot of attention to with these changes was what is going to be an acceptable barcode format. We had come from only being able to use a linear barcode format to be able to use our HPV instrument, to moving into some of these newer code types. Now, the trick in a system that's as big as ours is, what else is going to be on a label that might need to be considered, because your instrument is going to pick up your vial and it's going to spin it a full 360 and try to capture all of that information. So anything else that appears on that label has the potential to possibly derail what your instrument can read. So we spent a lot of time trying to prepare for this change and make sure that it was all going to be accepted. There's also times that, unfortunately, in an organization like ours, all it takes is one office that doesn't load a label printer quite the right way, and then you find yourself kind of trying to uncover a lot of rework and things like that. So we wanted to look for those I call them gotchas. And we spent a lot of time around that. So interestingly enough, even though we planned very, very well and had a really good read where we sent things off to BD and they sent us back like, hey, these barcodes look great. You should be able to move forward, no problem. Wouldn't you know that the system introduced yet another barcode that did cause us a little bit of pain. So this is just kind of you try and you do your best to plan, but sometimes you live and you die by a data matrix label. So we worked through all of that type of pre-work, I guess, and then it was finally time to have the instrument shipped to us. And let me tell you, this is a behemoth of an instrument. It takes up a full wall of our lab, but our space was ideal, so that was really awesome. Installation is very messy and labor intensive. This was a several day process where we had a lot of engineers on site, and it wasn't something that you can walk around very easily, but that was to be expected. They prepared us for that. We also had to make sure that our lab was prepared and had dedicated circuits for the operation. So we did all of that ahead of time. And then we made sure that we had plenty of space accounted for the UPSs, the uninterrupted power sources that would be able to continue in the event of a system electrical outage, which we do have. So in the implementation phase, BD works with the lab to provide at-elbow support, both the technical support, the LIS, and then suggestions on your validation. During the implementation phase, it's really important that you try to capture what your workflow looks like. When you have a continuous throughput instrument, it is a little bit hard to do that in the beginning because it's hard to wait out what a day looks like with the same set of personnel, knowing that you only have 8 hours in a workday. So that was a little bit of a struggle for us in the beginning. But once we identified that we were missing this, that was really important to being able to be successful with it. We also wanted to make sure that we were honing in on what maintenance looks like, and having a good maintenance program is really, really critical to having a good relationship with the COR, as with any instrument that is performing this type of testing. We also wanted to be able to interact with any other labs that had gone through the implementation. And so BD was good and put us in touch with Path Group that helped us a lot with this. So we really appreciated that partnership. What was nice about it is that you never know what kind of things are going to be introduced by providers or, the people that are actually like boots on the ground and in the physician offices and things like that. And, what are they going to implement into their process that's going to corrupt yours? We deal with that a lot. So having that open dialogue with other labs and being able to discuss some of these shared barriers was great, very helpful. And then we finally had identified 4 super users that were being trained. So we had 4 key personnel who were tasked with understanding the instrument operation and maintenance needs. And then we also trained additional personnel on what the pre-processing steps looked like. And so for us, pre-processing was, how do we get the specimens labeled and ready for that instrument? Oh, sorry, I seem to be having some difficulties. There we go. Okay, so when we were through all of this initial work and we were getting closer to our go live, we wanted to make sure our change management was still being paid attention to. So what does that look like? Well, for us, we had a blast of communication that went out, and we wanted to make sure the stakeholders were all a part of the communication and they were bought into the process. And you might notice that our go live date was January 2nd. So in our head, in the laboratory's head, we were thinking, gosh, wouldn't it be nice to have just that really clean cutoff at New Year's and be able to move from an old way into a new way? Well, it's that whole saying that best laid plans or no good deed goes unpunished. So we, despite putting some of this communication out and trying to get the system ready, we still had a fair amount of, oh, we're changing things. Oh, no one told us at the beginning of the year. So that was probably something that we could have done different as a lab that I would recommend that people do differently. But we were able to kind of weather that despite it. So our clinical IS update, as some people want to know, well, how much do you communicate and who do you communicate to? So we have a newer AI program within our system that helps us target all of the providers that are going to submit Pap tests, HPV tests to us, all of the medical assistants that work under them, all of the nurse practitioners and things like that. So we identified our audience and we targeted them 3 times within 2 months. So we also had kind of a call line ability for people to call in and say, okay, walk me through this. What do I need to do? We had several in-services that were set up with people, and our stakeholders and kind of our primary leaders in those areas, and we tried to make sure that everyone is prepared for the change that way. We made the announcement and we held our breath and we started on January 2nd. So, did all the planning pay off? Yes, the planning paid off, but as always, something doesn't go quite the way you envision. So in this instance, we're at the beginning of the year. We've come right off of a extended holiday break, and we have people that are being flown in to help support this go live. So it is not that we did not have the support we needed. It's just that when the rest of the world takes off for a holiday break, they forget a lot of things. So we encountered a lot in the first few days that are like, okay, if we don't fix this problem now with the way people are sending in specimens and not understanding how we changed the order names and things like that, it will cause us far more pain. So we took a real hard look at that, and we took time and retargeted people in that first week. So that, I guess, was to be expected, but more than what I had anticipated. And then we had a instrument issue when we started to place our first run. Now, up to this point, we had no problems at all during the implementation of the instrument, the verification, validations of the assay, things like that. It's just that it was that first day, and it was kind of a big mechanical failure that first day. However, we had a lot of good partnership between us and BD, and they were able to get us replacement mechanical parts. It worked through a weekend to help us get that done. So we really appreciated that. And we took time when our instrument was down, and we, again, retargeted staff at the provider level and our laboratory level. Wanted to make sure that everybody was getting the best information at that time. So we had a dedication to remedy all of this, and we had an incredible recovery. Just to speak to the inherent issues with BD core, sorry, not BD core, but with cervical specimens. As you know, if you either work with these specimens or you are a provider of these specimens, you can have the patients introduce barriers that maybe you didn't anticipate. Perhaps it is in the form of a lubricant, but in general, these specimens are kind of mucoid and gross, just for lack of a better term. And what we were really impressed with in the beginning when we started to use the instrument, and I'll see if this will play, if you can kind of see what is happening on the left-hand side with the pipette, I'll play it again. we have just like the string of mucus that had been pulled out of this particular sample. Well, what I was really impressed with is the instrument kind of shut down at that point. It knew that there was contamination and that we would need to go back in and do some cleaning and make sure that that sample was remedied and dealt with another way. So even though that was very, very gross and it took us some time to kind of recover from it, that ability for it to detect that problem was really impressive. For any other SurePath users, you know that this creates problems for labs sometimes, because everybody sees this hole here, which is intended for aliquoting tips, as the place to put into cervical brushings. So we did have some of that we had to go back and re-educate people and say, nope, nothing's changed here. You've got to keep all of your collection devices in this large mouth opening. So we had those two things we had to work through. So we reset our go live, and it was just a few days later, and everything went smooth at that point. Asking ourselves, did we achieve our goals? Well, did we decrease our process steps? Yes. And did we report the HPV via auto verification 85% of the time? Yes. Did our EMR work to trigger primary HPV screening algorithms? Yes. Did we reimagine the interaction for our providers? Yes. And for us, that meant going back and just making sure that we cut down the information that we were asking them to send us in order to be able to kind of make this primary HPV screening more attractive. So the new normal for us looks like this. This is just an example of just the HPV component of a test result. And so our providers were used to looking at quite a bit of text before this. So them having to look at this table was a big change, and where the table was located in our EMR was a change that they weren't quite prepared for. So in the beginning, this was deemed a miss, but since then, we've worked through to kind of create something better for them. And this is the whole speaking to innovation thing. So what we were able to do, because they liked their text and they didn't like their table so much, is we took the information that is now discrete results in our EMR, and we created a subscription for them so that all of this can be delivered to them and has both the Pap test results in it as well as whatever accompanying HPV results there are. It also has the ability to flag where we've never had that before. So these were all really, really positive developments for our clinicians and where they saw value in what we did. This is just one of our providers that actually teaches family medicine residency. She's probably one of the biggest supporters of not only the HPV extended genotyping, but also primary HPV screening. And, you know, as a stakeholder, as the one who's teaching that next generation of medical professional what this means, she and I had a great relationship through this. And we made sure that her voice was coming through in how we decided to attempt this change. For me as a lab manager, the informatics gains that we got, even though this is a rudimentary screen, it was pretty incredible. Before, if I wanted to tease out any of this information, I would have to go through language searches, ask to be revealed, what does HPV 16 look like? Take time, go back, look at the cervical cancer results, find it another way, catalog that into some kind of database. That's not the case anymore. So I am able to produce and follow trends much, much more effectively than what I've ever been able to do as a lab manager. Not only that, but we also wanted to make sure that we were capturing the idea that different HPV prevalence would be found in different ethnic groups if they were willing to provide that information. And so not only are we going to be able to track that by the prevalence in these groups, but we're also going to be able to age stratify, risk stratify, and follow these patients out much more powerfully. So this is just a quick reminder of the things that we discussed together. We wanted to make sure that we talked about what the impact of an integrated molecular automation looked like on laboratory efficiency in cervical cancer screening. We talked about the advantages of this HPV assay, including what extended genotyping means to patients and providers for more accurate risk assessment and patient management. And then finally, our future directions, and we're going to dedicate a little bit of time to this, is what do we explore as cervical cancer screening changes, and what does that mean as HPV self-collection is evolving and is definitely on the conversation of the year right now. So with that, I'm going to pause and see what kind of questions we have from the audience. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here.
Thanks, Melissa.
Absolutely.
We have some questions coming in. So to start, let's see. How do you use the HPV genotype trend data you now get by using the BD on Clarity HPV assay?
We're not using it yet. Right now, we're capturing it. But what we're doing is we're sharing this information with our primary physicians, our community practitioners, and things like that. We are trying to bring along providers that maybe aren't as intrinsically involved in the School of Medicine and the academic center proper. We're trying to make sure that they're getting the information that they need and understanding what this change means for women's healthcare, because we feel like there's a lag there, and we feel like there's a lack of understanding. We certainly see it in the way people try to use the test, and that they don't truly understand what they're for or what they should do with them. I marvel at the time that people call and say, what do I do with this result? So if we come across those things, we're taking time to educate them with those trends.
Great, thank you. And then the next question is, do you bill each genotype separately, or are you having any coverage issues?
They are not billed separately. We have not had any coverage issues so far.
Great. Next, how does the BD on Clarity HPV assay adapt to the evolving screening guidelines in patient management?
So where we see that there's going to be a shift as 16 and 18 vaccine maturity and the uptake is occurring, we know that there's going to be new genotypes and prevalence emerging. So we're going to be able to not only characterize when those genotypes get introduced to a patient in their screening history, we're also going to be able to see if perhaps a lesser type shift is happening that is going to put them at less risk for disease in the future. So the clinicians will be able to visualize not only what is happening at this point in time, but what did I look like a year ago? And, with the addition of new partners or things like that, has my risk increased? Do I have a persistence of a particular genotype that's increased? And that is what we're giving them now.
That's great. So it sounds like, to summarize, you're enhancing the risk stratification for that personalized patient management.
Yes.
All right, next question. We have, what demographics were used to determine which types would be individually detected? Vaccination status, race, age, etc.
Actually, all of those. That was a conversation that we had with our service line OBGYN leader. And these are the types of things that they wanted to capture, as well as they understand that we have different pockets of those ethnicities in Indianapolis. And knowing that there's a transient nature to some of them doing follow-up versus some of these people are more compliant, they're going to take that information and act differently in the future. This is all being talked about right now, but these are the kind of dreams that they had with us being able to give them those things and track those trends.
Great. And do you find this system easier to use than other high throughput molecular instruments you've used before?
It's exceedingly easy to use. I appreciate the fact that the continuous throughput is great. If there is a time where the instrument stalls in processing, there are audible alarms that will alert the personnel at their desk, which is nice. We have not had that up to this point. And then you're also able to go, you don't open the instrument very often. You're able to troubleshoot the instrument from being able to either correspond with engineers and look inside the instrument as to what's going on, or just these mild drawer empties and things like that you can do. So it is easy in that regard. A couple of things that probably need a little bit more review is what the Synapsys interface, some user friendliness of that interface could be to testing personnel. But the ease of that instrument is, yes, it is there.
That's great feedback. Thank you. And you kind of spoke to this a little bit, but what does the maintenance look like for COR?
The maintenance is probably one of the things that we were most excited about, because we come in the morning, we perform a couple of things for daily maintenance as far as environmental wipe downs and things like that. There's not like a hard shutdown calibration or anything like that. So start to finish throughout the day, that whole maintenance looks like an hour in a 24-hour period. So that has been very useful for us to, again, get our personnel back to where we really want them to be used.
That's great. Next question. How has your organization planned for implementing self-collection in a healthcare setting? And what are some key learnings or recommendations for other institutions who are also considering this program?
So for us, I feel like this is it's something that's evolving, just like it is for everyone else. Mm-hmm. When you take into consideration, what does it mean for a patient to be able to do self-collection? We know that currently it is a component where it says that it needs to be a healthcare facility. Okay, so if we take that out a step further and we think about, is that a CVS? Is that a local pharmacy? What is the definition of a healthcare facility? And then what does that interaction with their provider look like? Do they feel like does the provider feel like they're losing anything in that interaction, or are they going to see that as a benefit so that they can concentrate and triage patients that need more of their time? We believe that that's going to happen in the future, that it's going to be a benefit to the provider. One of the barriers that we have as a lab is understanding what that order looks like coming into our system as a lab. So what does the currying look like from a CVS, a Walgreens, something like that? What does the order look like? What does a registration look like? Some of these demographic pieces that we don't quite know how to put our finger on, not going to prevent us from being able to do the testing whatsoever, but to be able to offer a benefit to the community, these are all of the things that you have to take into consideration before you're ready to launch something like this. So our providers are interested, but they understand that there's a lot of things that we have to uncover together to be able to launch it the way we want to.
Great, thank you. The next question is, how do you get over the hump of providers that do not want to move to primary screening?
We decided not to force them. Mm-hmm. We thought about taking a completely different approach than what we ended up with. Being like, well, do we need to get you over the hump? Definitely feel like kind of that velvet hammer is a little bit better in terms of how you get people to comply. So what we're trying to do is, I anticipated about a 5% uptake this first year as far as people moving to primary HPV screening. And that has proven true so far. But what we want to do is circle back with them several times. And we do this through our OBGYN councils, our primary care leadership meetings, things like that, to explain how this could actually benefit them and the patients in the long run, whether that be billing, whether that be the time that it takes to return. We're just trying to get them to think a little bit more about what this could mean for them benefit wise, instead of digging your heels in and saying, oh, I'm never going to do this. We know that there's always going to be some element of resistance. So being able to offer this as something to do in the future was the approach we decided to take.
Great. And do you find so far that adult medicine is becoming a larger ordering force in HPV primary screening?
Adult medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I would say, and that's interesting to me, although I think that it kind of harkens back to how our residents are being taught. If you have a provider that is wanting to be on the forefront and understanding what this means in a family medicine realm, then you're going to have that shift happen a little bit easier. And that's certainly what we have, at least in my facility. But if you have someone that is like, I need to see everyone else do it before I'm going to take the lead, sometimes that balance is good. But we're trying to, as a lab, be ready to have that next step available to people. And if it takes them a while to get to it, it's fine.
Great, thank you. I think, to your point, there's more than one good way to screen a patient, and there's not a one size fits all. So I think that's a great approach. We're getting close on time, so I just wanted to give you the opportunity to, Melissa, if you have any closing comments that you'd like to leave the audience with before we close out.
Well, I thank everybody for their time today. I wasn't quite sure what the interest level in this whole thing would be. I just think that what I have found valuable in this process is learning kind of like how to work with stakeholders, but also like making sure that you have an open dialogue with the people that are supporting your lab, because they need to know that you are supporting them as well. And when you're both kind of acting in silos, it's going to be harder for you to get there. So once we opened up that dialogue and said, hey, providers, this is what we're thinking of doing to be ready for you when you're ready, it was amazing to me how many people are like, gosh, I've wanted this for a few years. I'm happy that it's here now. So it's scary. You have to lean into it and you have to go all in. But it's worth it. Really enjoyed this transition.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time today, and obviously your really critical and important insights. We'd also like to thank the LabRoots team for today's educational webcast. And before we go, I'd obviously love to thank the audience for joining us today and for your thoughtful questions. For those questions that we did not have time for today and those submitted during the on-demand period, they will be addressed via the contact information you provided at the time of your registration. This webcast can be viewed on demand, and LabRoots will alert you via email when it's available for replay. We encourage you to share that email with your colleagues who may have missed today's live event. Until next time, bye. Thank you.